You're listening to The Big Album Show with Paul Dillon and Dan O'Neill.
Hello and welcome to the latest edition of The Big Album Show with me, Paul Dillon.
And me, Dan O'Neill.
You're very welcome back to the show. How are you doing, Dan?
Getting on grand. You know, I'm sure. You know, it's strange times for everyone, but I getting on not too bad. How are you getting on?
Dan, I'm getting on very, very well. Let me tell you what I have been up to over the last couple of weeks. I have been listening to the Sinead O'Connor album, I Do Not Want What I Haven't Got, from 1991. It's not quite a big anniversary big album show because it's 31 years of age. We're making an exception for this podcast because if you can't make an exception for Sinead O'Connor, who can you make an exception for? I've been listening to that a lot. And other than that, I have been living my COVID best life. How about you?
Yeah, pretty much the same as that. Listening to the album, really enjoying it. But just people might be wondering how we're recording this, if we're meant to be socially distancing and all that kind of thing.
Yes, we're not breaking. No rules were broken in the recording of this podcast.
No, I'm in Limerick and Paul's in Dublin, so
Yes.
there's a large distance, a bit further than 3 meters between us. So all is good. But what did you think of the album?
You know, Dan, I do not want what I haven't got. It is 31 years. It's 31 years old. It is just it's the same age as me almost. It is I have to be honest with you. I found it a very emotional experience listening to the album. I didn't quite expect that to happen. It is incredibly deep and incredibly serious and very spiritual at times. And you know, I found it. I to be honest with you, it's a real journey into the heart of an amazing artist, I think.
Yeah, I think with Sinead O'Connor, what you see is what you get. And Sinead is someone who isn't afraid to show her emotion, both through interviews and in public, but also through her art, because she touches on some really, really serious themes in the album. And the thing about Sinead's voice, for me, is that, you know, when Sinead is singing, you can tell she's visiting the emotion she's singing about. It's real.
Yeah. I mean, there's absolutely no doubt that she's a showstopper, isn't she? Really, you know. And I got to thinking when I was listening to the album of the different times in my life when I have listened to Sinead O'Connor, and you know, she's the kind of artist. If you're in a shop, you know, and you're looking at the newspapers or you're looking at the deli counter and you hear Sinead O'Connor, you stop. You know, she has that quality, and for me it's all about that voice, you know, and it's a kind of a haunting voice, Dan, you know. It really can hold you when you're listening to it, you know.
It's amazing. It goes from kind of this fragile haunting voice to sometimes this kind of angry voice and everything in between, and you can really, like, Sinead O'Connor for me is of Ireland. I think Ireland is the only place Sinead O'Connor could have spawned from, because there's just so much of our culture, good and bad, wrapped up in her voice and in the way she approaches music. I mean, we'll get into the songs in a bit more detail later, but, you know, track 2, she gets a 17th century Irish poem and puts it over James Brown's funky drummer. I mean, only Sinead O'Connor could do that.
You're listening to The Big Album Show with Paul and Dan. Please remember to subscribe, hit like, and remember to follow us on our social media platforms at The Big Album Show. One of the things about the album, okay, if we look back at this, is the context of the time, Dan. She had released The Lion and the Cobra, which is the first album, which of course contained Troy, which would later give her a whole new audience. You know, more than 30 years later. But that album had launched her. But it really was this album which made her into a global superstar. I mean, she was absolutely huge. I mean, the album got incredible reviews at the time. I think NME named it the second best album of the year.
Yeah, she swept up in the MTV Music Awards in 1990. Nothing Compares to You was the biggest hit that year. Like, it was number 1 in the US, number 1 in the UK. Just complete, as you said earlier, show-stopping stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, nothing compares to you, right? I mean, like, let's talk about it because I mean, how could you not talk about nothing compares to you? Because it comes to mind anytime you think of Sinead, you got to think of nothing compares to you. I mean, can I just share this with you, Dan? I mean, I've seen Sinead O'Connor 3 times
Wow.
in the flesh. Okay, I saw her once supporting Damien Dempsey, where she just literally stole the show. She was kind of like a backing singer for him. It was one of those gigs that Damo does in Vicar Street at Christmas. Goes back now, this well over 10 years, I think. She had done some collaboration with Damo, and I saw her live, just totally stole the show. I
Mm.
saw her then doing a Witness gig, and who out there can remember Witness? Absolute disaster. I mean, the best thing that can be said about Witness is that they stopped holding them.
Yeah, I
Um,
remember one year. Just a little anecdote. I remember one year I went, and it was incredibly muddy. And I have memories of Green Day playing, the whole
mm,
field just being covered in mud that
yeah.
smelled of manure, and people people throwing the mud at each other. And I mean, there was queues outside the first aid tents with people who got mud in their eyes. It was crazy stuff.
Yeah, I mean, it just wasn't cool. It wasn't nice. I mean, I'd been to Glastonbury several years before that, and I remember the contrast. But anyway, the point I remember seeing Sinead O'Connor play that gig, and she did a middle of the day gig in a tent, and I was just happened to pass by, and you just the voice just came from it, and you just heard it, and you just went in, and it just blew me away as a little show. And she did all those songs that people would be very familiar with, because of course Sinead has had hit after hit after hit, and people forget that her career has been pretty solid, and she's produced so much good music since that album. But one of the things about Nothing Compares to You, Dan, is the pure emotion in the music.
It is incredible. And the video that went along with it too just made it pure perfect. Like when she looks into the camera in that video, everyone is familiar with it. It's iconic. And she sings about the flowers in the garden
Yeah.
going away. It's powerful stuff. It's an
It is,
incredible
and
song.
it kicks the ass off the Prince version.
It
I mean,
does.
we say the Prince version, of course, it was Prince's song, right?
Mm.
But I mean, come on. And of course, Prince just never got near it, did he? I mean, Sinead O'Connor, she nailed it. It's her version is the version. I mean, people occasionally try and do cover versions. You can't equal it though, can you? Her version. I mean, it's hers. It's not just a version. It's hers.
It's absolutely, there's few people who can take other people's songs and make it their own, and I'll tell you a few examples, right? So Aretha Franklin
Yeah,
takes the song Respect, makes it her own. You
yeah,
have Whitney Houston, who takes Dolly Parton's I Will Always Love You,
yeah,
makes it her own, and then Sinead O'Connor blows it out of the water here.
yeah.
Do you know that Sinead, I was watching Sinead doing an interview with Pierce Morgan, and she actually was talking about the only time she ever met Prince. Have you heard about this story? So basically what happened was, it's an odd encounter.
Mm,
So she was in LA, and Prince, apparently, according to Sinead, summoned her to his house because he wanted her to kind of be his protege.
mm.
So she gets to the house, and one thing leads to another. And to cut a long story short, the night ends with Prince chasing Sinead around a car, trying to punch her, while
Mm.
she's spitting back at Prince. And she eventually escapes Prince's grasp and knocks on a doorbell, and he runs off. But not a very pleasant encounter by the sounds of it.
I mean, Sinead O'Connor, Dan, is an artist that has, you know, she has done so many remarkable things over her life that it would require many, many podcasts to discuss the stories. But for me, Sinead O'Connor, I am just a huge fan of Sinead O'Connor and everything that she has done.
Yeah.
I can remember so many of her appearances down through the years on TV, the Late Late Show appearances. And I did see her I did see her once just in the flesh, not playing a gig. I was in a pub called Brooks L's. You know Brooks L's
Yeah,
in
yeah, of course.
in Dublin city centre. And there I was, and drifting through it. I wasn't using the bathroom now. I was actually going in but passing through, and she was sitting at the bar. This is about 10 or 12 years ago. She was just sitting at the bar eating this bowl of soup. You know that little small bowl of soup you get in a pub at Bruxelles, and the little one slice of McCambridge is on the side. She
Yeah.
was just sitting on the bar eating it with her eyes up at the TV,
Mm.
and the intensity of her stare at the TV was just so. She's a very very charismatic presence, you know.
She's
And
and by the sounds of it, Paul, she's always been kind of incredibly charismatic because if you go back to when she started in the music business, she started at the early age of, believe it or not, 14.
yeah,
So she was singing at the wedding of a teacher, and the brother of the bride was in the band in Chuanua.
mm,
And basically she started jamming with them and singing, and she really wanted to join the band, but they said no because she was too young, because if they're going on tour and that, they can't be bringing around a 14-year-old. But she wrote one of their really popular, well, the lyrics to one of the really popular early songs, Take My Hand. And at 14, to have that talent and ability is incredible. And a lot of, I know we're not talking about her first album, but a lot of the songs on her first album were actually written when she was quite young. So just a natural, incredible talent.
yeah, and I mean, she goes back a long way, and a lot of people have those kind of memories. I think of Sinead. Bono tells a story. I mean, can we talk about Bono on our podcast?
Of course.
Hashtag Bono. Yeah, here, and, but Bono paid a big tribute to her. He first heard her when he was a teenager, and she was maybe 15 or 16, and he had listened to a demo. I think it was a song called "Take My Hand."
Mm,
But again, he had that kind of experience. He was just deeply moved. And then later he went to see her do a show in Dublin. And you just Sinead O'Connor is just one of those artists whose music, when you hear it, it brings you back to the time you first heard it.
mm.
It has that effect on you, Dan, doesn't it? Sinead O'Connor's music.
Yeah, it certainly does. It is. It's like almost spiritual or something.
Yeah.
Like some of the songs on the album are like hymns, like particularly say the very last song that the album's named after. It's an a cappella song, and she talks about walking through the desert and all this kind of thing. It's a cryptic hymn, and that kind of spiritual vibe is inherent in her voice and features again and again in her lyrics. It's magical.
Totally, Dan. And I mean, we are all about the music here on the Big Album Show, so we will discuss some of the tracks in a moment. And I think it's worth noting for our listeners that Dan is the music the musician of the Big Album Show couple that we have going on
Allegedly.
here. For me, Dan, can I just give you my little couple of favorite tunes on the album, right?
Yeah, go for it.
So for me, Nothing Compares to You is number one,
Mm.
for reasons that I've already outlined, and will always be, just a really special song in my book. I really really like, and to be honest, I really like nearly all of the tracks in this album. There isn't a bad track on it.
Mm.
I like Feel So Different and Tree Babies. I put
Mm.
them up as my top three. Feel So Different, of course, kicks off the album. And one of the things about it is it just brings you in automatically to this kind of there's this religiosity in the thing. It
Yeah.
starts with the lyrics, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. And that's the real kind of thing, that we used to, if you go to the Gael Talk, you'd see it hanging up on the wall. I remember when I was at the Gael Talk, there was like a little kind of picture, one of those little stitch things where someone has stitched the words of something. And I remember it was like a white background, and I think the writing was pink. And there was another little sign up, another little picture, and it was the one, walking in the sand, the
Mm.
footsteps in the sand, so it starts off with that, but it just sucks you in right away, I think,
Yeah, it's incredible. And you know that I was listening to that prayer, and I was like, that's an interesting way to start an album. But when I did a bit of research on it, it's called the Serenity Prayer, right? And it's actually the prayer that's used in Alcoholics Anonymous, which kind of adds another layer of grittiness to the opening of the album.
Yeah, and I kind of didn't look at it that way. I mean, for me,
Mm,
it's almost like a lullaby,
mm,
and that's there's not a lot of harshness in it for me. I mean, I found it a lovely, soft way
mm,
to introduce the album. Dan, Three Babies for me would have been my third song. And I kind of found Three Babies. Again, I found it quite emotional and quite deep. I mean, the lyrics are pretty heavy.
mm,
At one point, she sings, "In my soul, my blood and my bones, I have wrapped our cold bodies around me. The face on you, the smell of you will always be with me."
mm.
It's quite deep stuff here we got going on. But there's this really nice melody on Three Babies. It's leaning to the more pop side of the album,
Yeah.
and for me, that's my little top three.
Yeah.
And I don't know, would you concur?
No, I have slightly different ones, but Three Babies to me is one of the most powerful songs on the album in terms of the emotion it evokes.
Mm.
I mean, it as you say, it's quite heavy, and there's various ways you can read into the lyrics, all quite heavy. But the actual kind of melody of it, to me it sounds kind of like Clannad or Enya with a bit of kind of
Yeah,
Sinead O'Connor attitude added in. Um, it's
definitely big Enya vibes running right through this, Dan. Yeah,
definitely that song in
or maybe it's
particular
big Sinead O'Connor vibes running through
running through
Enya.
Enya. Yeah, yeah, it could be, but the way she kind of she's singing so softly in that song, right? And
Yeah.
then she gets to lyrics like "No longer mad like a horse," and when she's singing those lyrics, it's almost like. Yeah, and I mean this in a good way. This kind
Mm.
of demon is bursting out of her. It's profound the way she changes her vocals to, as the song progresses. It's an incredible song. But look, my three songs, uh, nothing compares to you, has to be on there. It just it
Is
it
it number one for
it
you?
it would be, yeah, probably
It's gotta
probably
be.
it's got to be. Like, it's one of those songs that I just never ever get bored of. Like,
Yeah.
there's some massive songs, and this was a massive song, that although they're fantastically written, they're enjoyable, you don't necessarily want to hear them again and again. But no matter how many times I hear Sinead O'Connor sing "Nothing Compares to You," I always enjoy it.
Yeah.
But one of probably my second favorite song on the album is another quite heavy song. So it's Black Boys on
Mm.
Mopeds, and musically it's quite a simple song. So there's kind of three descending chords again and again, but the lyrics are Dylan-esque. They're political, and she's talking. I think it's a particularly relevant song at the moment, given that Black Lives Matter is happening.
Mm.
And we talk about things like a homelessness crisis and so
Mm.
on. I don't want to get too political and dark, but I think you have to talk about the politics of a song like Black Boys on Moped. So um,
Yeah.
it references various issues. So one of them was the case of a guy called Nicholas Bramble, who was a, a black man who was chased by police on a moped in the UK in 1989 because they assumed that he had stolen the moped. Of course, he hadn't stolen the moped, but he got so frightened when they were chasing him that he crashed the moped and sadly passed away. And this was one of the stories, just one of the stories, that
Mm.
inspired Sinead to write the song. And then there's also the case of a man called Colin Roach, who was 21, and he was found dead in the entrance of a police station in the UK. And prior to his death, there had been calls for investigations into police brutality at that particular station. So there was loads of protests, and Sinead's album sleeve actually contains a picture of Colin Roach's parents. So Sinead was sending a very, very powerful message of solidarity in writing this song. And then not only does she draw solidarity with the black community in the UK at the time, she also then talks about a woman in Smithfield holding three babies. The imagery throughout the song is very, very strong.
Yeah, it's very poetic. She starts that song with the first lyrics in it are, Margaret Thatcher on TV, shocked by the deaths that took place in Beijing. It seems strange that she should be offended. The same orders are given by her. It brings up themes of political hypocrisy, and it's a deeply sort of the way it's done. It's like a little. She just throws it in there. There's a bravery in it or something. It's kind of hard to the voice is so. You listen, don't you, to the lyrics in that song?
Well, one thing about Sinead O'Connor is, I have to say, is that she is absolutely incredibly brave,
Mm.
in every sense of the word, um, and especially through her music. You believe every word she is saying when she's
Oh
singing
yeah,
that song, and she
there's something
does.
so
She means every word she's saying, I think.
yeah, there's something incredibly sincere about it, isn't there? I mean,
Mm,
eh, you know, Dan, I think it's fair to say that we are making a slight exception for this album because normally on the big album show we reference the big birthdays of the big album. So your 10th, your 20th, your 30th. We did REM at a time, 30 years. This is
mm,
a little offbeat because Sinead O'Connor's album, I do not want what I haven't got, is 31
mm.
years old. But I mean, if you can't make an exception for Sinead, who can you make an exception for?
Yeah,
Because
absolutely.
she is because she is exceptional.
And
The
I'm really excited because she's actually releasing a book this year,
mm,
Rememberings it's called. I think she's releasing it in June, and I'm sure she's going to have incredible stories to tell. So that's something to watch out for.
that yeah, absolutely. I mean, and that'll definitely be coming on my bookshelf with the long-awaited Bono book as well. I got to get Bono in here twice in the one
Yeah, yeah,
podcast.
man. I
We're,
won't
we're
have a bad word said about Bono on this podcast.
we will fight Twitter over Bono before the year is out for sure. Dan, one thing that I'd like to discuss with you because I think it's worth talking about. Right? Do
Mm,
you remember? Because I can remember it very very well. October 1992, when Sinead O'Connor tore up the picture of Pope John Paul II during a performance on Saturday Night Live. I can remember at the time, Dan, and it
yeah.
was an enormous controversy, and it was played out for weeks, months, years. Um, there was huge criticism of Sinead in the aftermath of it. In fact, I think she got booed off stage at a gig she did shortly afterwards.
Mm,
She was, playing a tribute show to Bob Dylan. She got booed off the stage.
yeah, I've
There
seen
was
the
a
footage of that. It's on YouTube if people want to watch it. It is frighteningly scary to see a
yeah,
crowd getting so angry towards a young woman.
and she did it all as she did it as a protest, right?
Mm,
Um, and she stood by it. I remember, and she said that it was bringing up you know that Ireland needed to face some very difficult truths,
mm.
and that of course to quote Fidel Castro, and if you can't quote Fidel Castro on your own podcast, you can forget about it. Do you even have a podcast? But remember Fidel's thing: history will absolve me. I mean, there's no doubt that history has absolved Sinead on that action. She definitely there was the response at the time, was harrowing, but I think
Mm,
history absolved her, and again, it kind of speaks to that utter bravery of
mm.
Sinead. Um,
Ireland needed Sinead O'Connor at that point in our history. Funny enough, in the last episode we were talking about REM, and they had that song "Losing My Religion," and
mm,
Michael Stipe himself in an interview talked about how he believed that song took up a very different meaning in Ireland compared to elsewhere around the world.
yeah,
And Sinead O'Connor was hitting the world with this album at the same time, and I think art and music um reflects the kind of zeitgeist and the change in society
mm,
at various times in history, and for the kind of where Ireland was at the time in terms of beginning to push against, frankly, the theocracy we lived in. Um, Sinead O'Connor was the perfect kind of reflection of the anger that was beginning to emerge, and she played a very, very important role of breaking, in terms of breaking taboos and
yeah,
saying, well, actually, it's okay to say I don't believe in this stuff. I don't, I see what's happening here. And and I think her bravery has to be absolutely commended. And I think for certain times over the last, say, since the album came out, I do believe that at times Sinead O'Connor has been unfairly treated by people in perhaps the media, but in society in general, kind of. But for me, the more I read about Sinead, the more I learn about her, the more I listen to her music, the more I respect her as someone who's just absolutely fearless and wears her heart on her sleeve.
Yeah, absolutely, Dan. I agree with all of that, and I mean, I think that was then. That was 1992. The
Mm.
world is completely different now. I mean, the Pope, of course, is supposedly infallible, but I mean, the action was incredibly brave in 1992. Now, it would look different,
Mm.
and presumably it would shock far less. But at the time, it shocked a lot of people, and it had a particular effect. I wonder, Dan, did it affect her career negatively? And if so, then an injustice was done to Sinead, wasn't it?
Yeah, I think you'd have to say it probably did, um, because it was just so, it was just so rebellious that, like, it was it was it's hard to explain, I think, to people who may, were, how shocking it was to a lot of people at the time.
Yeah,
Like the Catholic Church was incredibly powerful in this country, but also around the world,
yeah,
because these scandals were only beginning to emerge.
yeah,
So to go on TV and rip up a picture of the Pope was an incredibly shocking act.
yeah. A very, very different interaction, of course. Uh, Dan, a very different time.
Yeah, but I mean, there was a funny depiction then a few years later, probably around 1998, in Father Ted. I don't know if you remember when there was a parody of Sinead O'Connor. So when a feminist musician called Niamh Connolly appears on Craggy Island. Do you remember that episode? And
Yes, yes.
and so she appears, and Ted is off doing the lovely girls competition, and in the meantime, Dougal gives her the parochial house. And so then Father Ted is trying to get the house back, but she does her best to kind of radicalize Mrs. Doyle. But it's a gas episode. There's nothing. Again, you can talk about Bono, you can talk about Castro. You should also always talk about Father Ted as well. I think a Father Ted reference always goes down well.
but Dad, to borrow an expression from Sinead, not Prince, nothing compares to Sinead, and nothing quite compares to this album. Beautiful album, highly recommended to people. Go and listen to it. You will go if you're not familiar, you will love it. I don't want what I haven't. I do not want what I haven't got from 31 years ago. Great album. Dan, what do you think? Would you give it? Would you dare rate it out of 10?
Oh my God. I think I'm going to give it a very strong 9. And I don't
Mm.
know why I'm docking 1. I think I might save like 10 for something like Sergeant Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band or
Mm.
something. Uh,
Yeah.
I just think not. Yeah, a
Or for your
very
own
strong
forthcoming
9.
album, you give yourself 10 out of 10.
Yeah, what about you? Where would you
I
rate it?
I give it. I got to concur with you. Going to give it 9. No reason to take one off. I'm going. We gave out a time 8. I think that Sinead O'Connor's "I Do Not Want What I Haven't Got" is a
Oh,
step up from it.
I'd agree.
Uh, so released 31 years ago, March 1990, 20th of
Oh,
March 1990. Go and listen to it if you haven't.
can I say, and while you're telling people to listen to this, that I think the way since being involved in this podcast, I know this is only the second album we've done,
Yeah.
but it's really changed kind of the way I've been listening to albums. Because remember when you were a bit younger, and before Spotify and all of that kind of thing, you used to have to go out and actually purchase the album.
Yeah.
And you put a bit more weight in the kind of value of it, because you had the CD, it was a new CD or a vinyl or whatever, and you'd listen to it again and again, and you'd get to know all the tracks on
Yeah.
the album. I found that I've started doing that again with the two albums reviewed so far. And what I want to recommend to people is, when we're listening to these albums ourselves, to join in with us, to look at this as
Absolutely.
almost like a kind of a book club or
Absolutely.
something, and actually listen to the albums. Yeah, what album are we going to do in the next episode, Paul?
Well, that brings us on to our next episode. And I concur, Dan. Let's build up the big album show community out there. Listen to the albums with us, and listen back to our pods at a time. We've covered Out of Time, and we've done Sinead O'Connor as well, of course. And we are going next, Dan, to an album that I really, really like, and I hope that others are going to like as well. And that is from Ash, Dan. That's our next album. Do you remember Ash?
Of
Free All
course I do.
Angels.
Free All Angels was, if you're kind of in our age group, Paul,
Oh, yes.
that album, Free All Angels, I think, was kind of like the sound, to some extent, of kind of teenage life.
Yes.
It,
Yes.
it's just, it reminds me, when I think of it, I remember summers. I
Yes.
remember kind of for some reason in my memories, the summers are always really hot and warm.
Yeah.
But given it's
And they
Ireland, it's
weren't.
probably not the case.
Dan, hold that thought, because the next podcast will be on Ash, Free All Angels, released 23rd of April 2001, almost 20 years ago. Please listen to that album with us.
And before we go, lads, do us all a favor too. Get onto the iTunes, the Apple Podcast app, and whatever app you use to listen to this podcast. Give us a like, give us a review, and please, please, please tell your mates about this podcast, because we want to keep it going, but we want to get it out to as many people as possible.
And we need you guys out there to make it happen. So please remember to like us on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook. Tell us your memories. Tell us your ideas. We're here. We're up for it. Thank you to everybody who has supported us so far. Thank you to everybody for their comments. We even got emails. Thank you for suggesting albums. We really appreciate it. And let's build the big album show. Remember, Dan, what they said? If they build it and they will come. Yeah,
they will come. Yeah.
Thanks very much to everybody for listening. Slán.
You're listening to the Big Album Show with Paul Dillon and Dan O'Neill.